In my previous life, I was recognized by the wealthiest family. My mother gave me a family heirloom bracelet, and from that moment on, I, who had always been healthy, developed cancer. Meanwhile, my bedridden sister from the wealthy family miraculously recovered and was reborn. Returning to the day of recognition, I curled my lips into a smile and slipped the bracelet under my bedridden sister's mattress. In this life, let's see who outplays whom. Let me tell you, when you're about to die, what flashes through your mind isn't a montage of your life, it's why your mother wanted to kill you. November 2021, 3rd floor of the oncology department, Beijing First People's Hospital. I lay on the bed by the window, so thin that my ribs protruded one by one. The sunlight outside was blindingly bright, glaring off the white walls. I stared at the light for a long time before slowly shifting my gaze to my left wrist. The jade bracelet was a translucent, vivid emerald green, so lustrous it seemed as if water could be squeezed from it. 3 years ago, when my mother personally slipped it onto my wrist, she said it was an heirloom passed down through 5 generations of the Su family, and only the daughter who had been recognized was worthy of wearing it. Her eyes reddened, her fingers trembling as she pushed the bracelet over my wrist bone. Using a bit of force that made me hiss in pain, she said, "Wan Wan, welcome home." It was the most beautiful sentence I had ever heard in my life. I went missing in the countryside at the age of 6 and was raised by an elderly couple until I was 20. In the autumn of my 20th year, a group of people in black suits suddenly appeared at the factory gate, the woman leading them, her hair styled in an elegant bun and a pearl necklace around her neck, burst into tears the moment she saw me. She rushed over and hugged me, trembling uncontrollably. She said, "Wan Wan, I've been looking for you for 14 years. My biological father, Su Guobang, was the head of the Su family in Beijing, a name that consistently ranked in the top 20 on the rich list. My mother, Shen Ruohua, was the 3rd daughter of the Shen family in Hong Kong. These were my biological parents." At that moment, I felt as if I were dreaming, a dream too extravagant to even imagine. On the day of recognition, in the courtyard of the old house with its blue bricks and gray tiles, ginkgo leaves had fallen, covering the ground in a golden carpet. Over a dozen people crowded the living room. My mother took my hand and, in front of everyone, retrieved the jade bracelet from a dark red brocade box. "This was passed down to me by your grandmother when I married into the Su family. As the eldest daughter of the Su family, you should wear this bracelet." The moment the bracelet was slipped onto my wrist, I felt something on its inner surface press against my skin, a faint, subtle sensation, as if there were tiny raised patterns. At the time, I didn't pay it much mind, assuming it was the natural texture of the jade. It was only later that I discovered a circle of inscriptions carved on the inner surface, 8 small seal characters. Before I died, I finally deciphered those 8 words: "Extend life with life," using blood kin as the guide. After putting on the bracelet, in the 3rd month, I began losing large amounts of hair. By the 6th month, I had an inexplicable persistent low-grade fever. In the 8th month, I lost 20 gene in just 3 months. My face hollowed out, and my sunken eyes made me look 10 years older. The person in the mirror increasingly resembled someone else, resembled Su Yin. My younger sister was 3 years my junior. At the age of 8, she contracted a strange illness, suffering from muscle atrophy and remaining bedridden for 12 full years. On the day we were reunited with our family, I didn't see her. My mother said she lived in the innermost room on the 2nd floor, with nurses providing round the clock care. At the time, I felt quite distressed, thinking about how bitter it must be for my own sister to be so young and confined to bed, unable to move. Looking back now, I truly was an idiot. I was diagnosed with cancer in March 2021, late-stage pancreatic cancer with liver metastasis. When my mother received the diagnosis, she cried, tears falling one by one. I leaned against the door outside the consultation room, my whole body chilled. A nurse came over to support me and said, "Miss, don't be afraid. Your mother is inside discussing treatment options with the doctor." I believed her, I really did. It wasn't until 17 days before my death that I discovered the truth. That afternoon, the young nurse responsible for delivering medicine to Su Yin went to the wrong floor. Seeing me lying in bed, she blurted out, "Third miss, why have you lost so much weight? Yesterday I saw her still." She suddenly stopped speaking, her expression changing, and she turned and left. "Third miss, the Su family only has 2 daughters. Where did a 3rd miss come from?" That night, after waiting for the caregiver to fall asleep, I pulled out the 4-needle and, holding onto the wall, shuffled step by step out of the ward. The corridor was long, the fluorescent lights harsh and white, the rehabilitation department was at the far end of the hallway. The door to the innermost VIP room was not fully closed. Leaving a narrow gap, I pressed my face against the crack to look inside. Soo-in was propped up against the headboard, color returning to her face, her lips a healthy pale red. She was feeding herself lotus root starch with a spoon, looking nothing like someone who had been bedridden for 12 years. My mother sat by the bedside, one hand supporting the bottom of the bowl for her, the other tidying her braids. "Today the therapist said your leg muscle strength has recovered by 2 levels again," she said. "In another 2 months, you'll be able to walk." Soo-in swallowed a mouthful of lotus root starch, lifted her face, and smiled. "Mom, how is it going with my sister?" My mother tucked her hair behind her ear, her movements so gentle as if afraid of shattering porcelain. Then she spoke, her tone so calm that it sent a chill from my scalp to my soles. "The doctor said she has at most half a month left." Soo-in was silent for a moment. "Then the bracelet. Wait until she takes her last breath before removing it." My mother placed her hand on Soo-yin's back, her voice soft and steady. "The master said that before the last breath is completely drawn, the bracelet must not be removed from her body." Soo-in nodded, the corners of her mouth curving slightly, not in guilt, but in relief. I leaned against the wall outside the door, covering my mouth with my hand, making not a sound. Tears streamed through my fingers, falling into the gap between the bracelet and my wrist. The runes on the inner surface of the bracelet grew warm, as if coming alive. I bit down on my knuckles until my mouth filled with the taste of rust. Because I knew that if I were discovered now, I wouldn't even have the last half a month left. I pushed myself along the wall, step by step, back to the ward. My mind was consumed by one recurring thought: my mother wants me dead. The woman who brings me bird's nest soup every morning and tucks me in every night wants me dead, trading my life for her other daughters. At 3:40 p.m. on November 17, 2021, as the last bit of vitality was drained from my body, the jade bracelet on my left wrist burned like an iron bracelet freshly pulled from fire. The green hues within it seemed to flow with life, spinning faster and faster, until suddenly it snapped. Not the bracelet itself, but the invisible thread connecting me to her. My vision began to darken, and hearing was the last sense to fade. I heard footsteps in the corridor, then my mother's voice. She was on the phone. "Since the bracelet's color has changed, she must be recovering. Try to get her to stand up." I didn't hear the rest. But I didn't need to. In the darkness, I ground my molars until they shattered, carving a sentence into my heart word by word: "If there is a next life, I will personally return this bracelet to your hands." Then I died. Then I opened my eyes. The ceiling was made of wood, with fine wood grain, and a lotus-shaped chandelier hung right in the center. The wall on the left was built of blue bricks, adorned with an inkwash painting of lotus flowers. The window on the right was half open, and the shadow of ginkgo leaves was cast on the gauze curtain. The air carried the fragrance of osmanthus, mingled with the scent of old wood. This was the Soo family's old house, the room I had lived in for 2 years. I sat up abruptly. My left wrist was empty, no bracelet, the skin smooth and intact, without needle marks or scars. I threw off the covers, jumped out of bed, and ran barefoot to the full-length mirror. In the mirror stood a 20-year-old young woman, her face full, her eyes bright, her hair jet black and thick, cascading over her shoulders. She was alive, healthy, whole. 20-year-old Soo-won. Suddenly, footsteps sounded outside the door, thumping heavily on the old wooden floor of the house. The door was pushed open, and my mother stood in the doorway. 45-year-old Shin Ruohua wore a goose-yellow silk blouse, with pearl earrings swaying gently by her cheeks. She was smiling, her eyes slightly reddened. Exactly as I remembered, exactly as she was on the day we were reunited 3 years ago. "Wan," she walked toward me. "Mom has been looking for you for 14 years. She opened her arms, ready to embrace me. I stood in front of the mirror, watching her approach step by step. At this moment 3 years ago, I cried, feeling like the luckiest person in the world. At this moment 3 years later, I did not cry. I stared at my mother's face for a long time, and then I saw it. Deep within the tears in her eyes, there was a trace of tightly suppressed tension. She was observing, confirming something, confirming whether the bracelet would take effect once it was put on. Slowly, I curved the corners of my mouth. "Mom," I called out to her, my voice just like 3 years ago, a little timid, a little surprised. She pulled me into her arms, the scent of gardenia perfume enveloping me. Over her shoulder, I saw Butler Chen standing at the door, holding a dark red brocade box in his hands. The lid was open, and lying on the black velvet inside was that jade bracelet, emerald green, like an open eye. My mother released me, took the brocade box from Butler Chen, and held it out to me with both hands. Wan Wan, this is the bracelet that has been passed down in our Su family for 5 generations. You are the eldest daughter of the Su family, and you should wear this bracelet. She picked up the bracelet, lifted my left hand, and aligned the bracelet with my fingertips. On the inner wall of the bracelet, I saw those 8 shallowly carved runes. My mother's hands were steady as if she were performing the most important task of her life. The moment the bracelet touched my fingertips, my fingers instinctively drew back slightly. A flicker of tension flashed in my mother's eyes, then I smiled. I actively extended my hand forward, fingers pressed together, allowing the jade bracelet to slide smoothly over my knuckles and metacarpal bones, finally clicking into place around my wrist. A cold temperature seeped from the inner wall of the bracelet into my skin, and the positions of the 8 runes grew slightly warm. My mother's shoulders relaxed, she let out a breath, smiled, and took my hand. It looks so beautiful. Our Wan Wan looks beautiful in anything. Thank you, Mom, I said. My voice was as sweet as honey, the corners of my mouth curved like crescent moons, and my eyes were clear, empty of everything. Only I knew that, with the tip of my tongue pressed against the roof of my mouth, I was biting back 3 words. Just wait. The sound of a wheelchair rolling came from upstairs, its wheels rumbling over the wooden floorboards, passing the door of the room at the far east end of the hallway, and then stopping. Someone was listening to the activity downstairs. I lifted my left wrist, turning it under the light. The jade bangle refracted a rich, deep green glow. Then I raised my head and glanced toward the room on the 2nd floor. The curtain twitched slightly, as if someone had just withdrawn their hand. I withdrew my gaze and linked my arm with my mother's, calling out sweetly, "Mom, I want to go see my sister." My mother's arm stiffened for an instant, but my fingers were resting on her forearm, and the tension in her muscles was clearly transmitted to my fingertips. Because of her poor health, it might not be convenient today, but I just want to take a quick look, I said, gently shaking her arm. I've heard my sister has been ill for many years, and I want to meet her. I'm her older sister. After all, I pronounced those last 5 words very clearly, and my mother's pupils contracted slightly. She was silent for 2 seconds, then smiled again, patting the back of my hand. All right, Mom will take you up. The door to the room at the end of the 2nd floor hallway was tightly closed, the curtains drawn completely shut. My mother knocked twice on the door, her voice extremely soft and gentle. "Eneen, your sister is here to see you." There was a long silence from inside the room. And then a faint, kitten-like voice emerged. "Come in." The room was dim, illuminated only by a small nightlight on the bedside table casting a dim yellow glow. The air was thick with the smell of traditional Chinese medicine, bitter and astringent, mixed with the scent of disinfectant. Half of the white gauze canopy was drawn down, and inside, a paper-thin figure leaned against the headboard. It was Su Yin, 17 years old. Her face was no larger than a palm, her skin so pale it was almost translucent, revealing the blue veins beneath her temples. Her hair was sparse, and her entire body seemed to sink into a pile of pillows and blankets, like a flower pressed dry. When she saw me enter, her eyes lit up for a moment, then my gaze shifted downward, to her right hand resting outside the covers. Around her wrist was a string of jade beads, each about the size of a soybean, strung on a red cord and wrapped 3 or 4 times around her shockingly thin wrist. The color of the jade was exactly the same as my bangle, cut from the same piece of material. The bangle was the main component, while the beads were the scraps, forming the core and auxiliary arrays of the life exchange ritual. I smiled, my eyes curving into crescents, my expression sweet and gentle, as I walked toward the bed. After all, I'm her older sister. I sat by her bedside, reached out, and took her right hand in mine. My fingers rested precisely on the string of jade beads. The beads were warm, not warmed by body heat, but with a warmth that seemed to emanate from within, as if something were flowing inside them. When Su Yin felt my hand holding hers, she turned her head to glance at our mother standing at the door. Our mother gave a barely perceptible nod with her chin, and Su Yin smiled, a pure, gentle smile, like a kitten that hadn't yet grown its claws. "Sister, you're finally back." It was her. I gathered her hand in my palm, my thumb gently stroking the jade beads one by one. I could feel that the skin beneath the bracelet was slightly warmer than my own hand, just a little, but that slight warmth indicated the direction of flowing vitality. I lowered my head and pressed my face against the back of her hand. "Eneen, sister, I'll come to see you every day from now on. Your illness will surely get better, it will surely get better, because I've come back, I've brought your life back with me." That night, I lay in bed in my own room. The bracelet on my left wrist emitted a faint warmth in the darkness. I raised my left hand to eye level and examined it closely by the moonlight streaming through the window. The moonlight passed through the jade bracelet, and inside, it seemed as though liquid were slowly flowing. The positions of the 8 runes glowed faintly with a dark red light. I remembered a sentence our mother had said at the recognition banquet earlier that day. I hadn't paid attention to it then, but now it came back to me. She said, "This bracelet was passed down to me by your grandmother. She had worn it for over 30 years, and her health had remained robust throughout. She was the blessing of our family, but if she had worn it for over 30 years and remained healthy, how could it have been passed to Eneen, who fell ill shortly after receiving it? The timeline doesn't add up. Eneen became ill at age 8, and the bracelet was only passed to me after her illness. In other words, this bracelet requires a healthy blood relative to activate it. It couldn't be worn by Eneen because her body couldn't withstand the backlash of the life exchange ritual, so they needed a healthy blood relative to serve as a bridge. I had been lost for 14 years, and on the very first day I was found, I became that bridge. I turned over, got out of bed, and walked barefoot to the window. The courtyard of the old family house lay quiet under the moonlight, like an inkwash painting. I looked toward the second floor. Eneen's room still had the light on, and I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. 2 figures, one sitting, Eneen, and one bending over, our mother. What were they saying? Probably celebrating that the bracelet had been successfully placed, celebrating that the life exchange ritual had begun to operate. I leaned against the window frame, and the corners of my mouth slowly curled upward. Laugh while you still can, because in this life, the rules of the game have changed. I am no longer the fool kept in the dark. I am a ghost who has crawled back from the grave. The next morning, I woke up early. As I passed the corner of the staircase, I heard voices coming from the living room on the first floor. It was our mother's voice, kept low, but the wooden structure of the old house transmitted sound with astonishing clarity. "Go for a follow-up examination in 3 months, we'll see how the indicators change then. The master said that as long as the bracelet's position remains unchanged, we'll see results within the first cycle." Did the sleep monitoring data from last night come out? It was my father's voice. The duration of deep sleep increased by 40% compared to the day before. Ruahua is truly effective this time. My mother fell silent for a few seconds, then said, "What about him over there? He's already started to run a fever. I touched the bracelet this morning, and its temperature has risen by 0.3 degrees compared to last night. That's good." My father's voice carried a hint of relief. "Once we get through these 3 years, Eneen will be completely cured. As for Wan, after she's gone, we'll give her a proper funeral." My mother didn't speak. A proper funeral. That was their only compensation for me. I stood at the corner of the second floor, my nails digging into my palms. Then I released my grip, adjusted my expression, and walked downstairs with light steps. "Mom, Dad, good morning." The conversation in the living room abruptly stopped. My mother turned her head, her expression shifting from solemn to affectionate in just 3 seconds. The speed of the change was worthy of an award-winning actress. Wan, why didn't you sleep a little longer?" She walked over and took my hand, her fingers naturally resting on my left wrist, feeling the temperature of the bracelet. "I want to go keep Eneen company. You 2 sisters should spend more time together." I carried a bowl of silver ear mushroom soup upstairs. Eneen's door was slightly ajar, so I knocked twice and pushed it open. Su-Een was leaning against the headboard. Her complexion today was slightly better than yesterday's, with a faint hint of color appearing on her cheeks. "Sister, why are you here?" "I brought you some silver ear mushroom soup." I placed the bowl on the bedside table, pulled over a chair, and sat by the bed. Reaching out, I helped pull her blanket up a little, and my fingers inadvertently brushed against the string of jade beads on her wrist. The beads were even hotter than yesterday, at least 1 degree warmer. As if something inside was accelerating, when my fingers touched the beads, Su-Een stiffened almost imperceptibly, instinctively pulling her right hand back slightly and covering the string of beads with her left hand. "Sis, your bracelet is really pretty." Her gaze fell on my left wrist. "Mom said this was passed down by Grandma, and it's only for the eldest daughter of the Su family, right?" I lifted my left wrist and turned it slightly. "So, do you like it? If you do, Sis can lend it to you for a few days." Su-Yin's eyes flickered for a moment. In that instant, a very complex light flashed in his eyes. Longing, apprehension, and something else I couldn't quite name. Then he shook his head, smiling obediently and sensibly. "No, sis, this is what Mom gave you. I can't wear it, I shouldn't wear it. It's not that I don't want to." I smiled even more sweetly. "All right then, when you're better, sis will take you to buy an even prettier one." I stayed in his room for about 20 minutes, watching him slowly finish the silver ear mushroom soup. He leaned back against the pillow, looking tired, his eyelids starting to droop. I stood up and tucked the blanket around him. "If you're sleepy, just sleep. Sis will come see you again this afternoon." He didn't answer, already half asleep. I stood by the bed, looking down at her. I watched for a long time. Asleep, Sue-Yin looked even smaller, with long eyelashes resting gently under her eyes. That string of jade beads lay quietly on her right wrist. He looked so innocent, so fragile, but I knew that inside this porcelain piece were carved the same 8 words as on my bracelet: extend life with life, blood kin as the guide. I turned and walked out of the room, gently closing the door behind me. Instead of going downstairs, I continued deeper down the hallway. At the end of the corridor was a storage room, and in the corner was a small door leading to the attic of the old house. I had never gone up there in my previous life, but in this life, I wanted to see it. The wooden ladder was old, creaking with every step. The attic wasn't large, with a slanted roof and light filtering in through a palm-sized skylight. In the center of the attic stood an altar table, covered with a red cloth, on which rested an incense burner, 2 candle holders, and a stack of yellow talisman papers. Against the wall, right in the middle of the altar table, was a black and white photograph of an old woman, her lips curved upward but her eyes completely devoid of any warmth. In front of the photograph was a small wooden box, about the size of a palm, densely carved with talismanic symbols. I recognized those symbols. They were exactly the same as the ones carved on the inner surface of the bracelet. I opened the wooden box, which was lined with red velvet. Lying on the velvet were 3 items: a silver needle, a folded piece of yellow paper, and a small fragment of jade. The scrap of jade was the same type as the beads on Inin's wrist and the bracelet on mine. I picked up the yellow paper and unfolded it. The characters, written in cinnabar ink in tiny, dense regular script, filled the page. The top line read, "Life-swapping technique." I read it line by line, my fingers tightening with each word. "Extract the vital energy of a blood relative of the same origin and transfer it to the limbs of the recipient. The primary energy must be matched with the secondary energy. The primary energy suppresses the practitioner, while the secondary energy consists of the 3 vital energies of the recipient. At the time of the minor filial anniversary, the major filial act is revealed. After 3 years of effort, the recipient is cured, and the practitioner." The last 2 characters were somewhat blurred by the cinnabar seal, but I still recognized them. "Perish." I folded the yellow paper back to its original shape, placed it in the box, and closed the lid. Then I straightened my body and stared for a long time at the black and white photograph on the altar. The elderly woman in the photo was my grandmother, the matriarch of the Su family's previous generation, who had passed the bracelet down to my mother. She had been dead for many years, yet her eyes still seemed to be staring at me from the picture. Coming down from the attic and returning to my room, I sat on the bed. The bracelet on my left wrist was still slightly warm. I took off the bracelet, turned it over, and carefully examined the 8 characters on the inner wall against the light from the window. "Extend life with life, blood relatives as the guide." I put the bracelet back on my wrist. The moment the cool jade touched my skin, I felt an extremely faint suction, as if countless invisible, tiny tentacles were extending from the inner wall of the bracelet, piercing into my blood vessels, and beginning to slowly, tirelessly suck the life out of me. I had been drained for 3 years until I became an empty shell. This time, I won't wait 3 years. Su-Yin. I slowly rotated my wrist in the sunlight streaming through the window, my voice so low that only I could hear it. "Those beads on your wrist, haven't they been getting hotter these past few days?" "That's right, because this time, for every bit of vitality the bracelet takes from me, I will make you repay it personally." At 11 p.m., the old house fell completely silent. I heard my mother's footsteps leaving Su-Yin's room, followed by the sound of the master bedroom door closing. Half an hour later, the entire house was still, save for the occasional faint creak of old wood in the night breeze. I turned over, got out of bed, and walked barefoot to the window. I pulled the curtain aside just enough to let a sliver of moonlight in. The moonlight fell on my left wrist, where the bracelet glowed quietly, its deep green hue resembling a bottomless pool of water. I reached out and stroked the surface of the bracelet. The temperature I felt with my fingertips was slightly higher than it had been during the day. I counted my heartbeats, 1, 2, 3, each beat pumping blood through my body and gradually sending vitality out through the 8 small rotors on the bracelet around my wrist. I returned to bed, lay down, and stared at the blurred outline of the lotus-shaped chandelier on the ceiling. Slowly, word by word, I silently recited the incantation for the life-swapping ritual in my mind. I had actually guessed the meaning of those cinnabar red characters. The incantation stated that the caster would perish, followed by a half-sentence, on the day of the caster's death. The soul of the auxiliary energy is taken, the auxiliary energy's soul, that is, the soul bound by the beads on the wrist. That's why, in my past life, the color of the bracelet changed on the day I died. It wasn't because the life swap was complete, it was because my final wisp of soul had been absorbed by the beads. I pressed my left wrist against my chest, feeling the resonance between the bracelet and my heartbeat. This time, in the darkness, I silently moved my lips, wondering who would absorb whose soul. The old house stood silent in the night, like a crouching beast. A faint line of light from the nightlight in the room at the end of the second-floor corridor peeked through the gap in the curtains, shining steadily throughout the entire night. I closed my eyes and slept for the first time since my rebirth, lulled by the slight warmth of the jade bracelet. In my dream, I tucked the bracelet under Eneen's mattress, then stood by the bed. Watching her complexion gradually turn gray, I smiled in the dream, exactly as I had at the recognition banquet, sweet, obedient, with clear, empty eyes, holding nothing back. On the morning after my rebirth, I woke up burned by the temperature on my wrist. It wasn't a scorching heat, but a gentle, lingering warmth, as if someone were constantly pressing their fingertip against my pulse. I opened my eyes, lifted my left hand, and saw the jade bracelet glowing with a soft green light in the morning sun. I rotated the bracelet, noticing that the skin on my wrist where the 8 characters on the inner surface rested was hotter than anywhere else. It was working. Less than 24 hours had passed since my mother put the bracelet on my wrist, and it had already begun drawing something out of my body. In my previous life, it took me 3 months to notice the hair loss because I was foolish. I had never considered that possibility. This time was different. I closely monitored every slight change in my body. Footsteps approached outside the door, light, steady, carrying a distinctive rhythm on the wooden floors of the old house. My mother's footsteps. In my past life, I listened to them for over 2 years. In the half-month before I died, I lay in my hospital bed counting her steps, exactly 47 from the elevator to the hospital room door, each step landing heavily on my heart. Wan, are you awake? The door was pushed open gently. My mother walked in carrying a white porcelain stew pot, wearing a lotus-pink loungewear dress, her hair loosely tied back at the nape of her neck, wearing that gentle smile that had moved me to tears in my past life. Mom, I sat up in bed, rubbed my eyes, and controlled my voice to sound hoarse from just waking up. Did you sleep well last night? He placed the stew pot on the bedside table, sat down naturally by my bed, and reached out to touch my forehead. The movement was so fluid, as if he had done it 1,000 times. No. Not him. It was like him. Indeed, he had done it 1,000 times. In my past life, he touched my forehead, served bird's nest soup, and tucked the blankets around me every day. I thought it was maternal love then, but now I know it's checking the equipment's operational status. I slept quite well. I smiled at him and looked down at the stew. The bird's nest soup was exactly the same as last time. I scooped a spoonful into my mouth. It was sweet and perfectly stewed. Last time, I felt this spoonful of bird's nest soup was full of my mother's love, but this time, I tasted something else. Beneath the bird's nest soup was a faint hint of bitterness, not the fishy smell of the bird's nest itself, but a subtle bitterness masked by sweetness. It was the same ingredient added to the chicken soup I drank in my past life, Angelica sinensis, Dangue, which accelerates blood circulation and speeds up the operation of the life exchange array. I drank the entire pot of bird's nest soup clean, leaving not a drop, and even licked the spoon after finishing. I lifted my face and smiled at him. Mom, it's so delicious. A look of satisfaction rose in her eyes, not the satisfaction of a mother watching her child drink soup she made herself, but the satisfaction of seeing medication successfully administered. As long as you like it, Mom will make it for you every day from now on. I smiled with my eyes curved in delight. See how simple it is to play the role of a good daughter. Just smile. Just be obedient. In my past life, I was genuine. In this life, I am acting, but who cares? He isn't genuine either. After finishing the bird's nest soup, my mother said she would take me to buy a few new outfits. In my previous life, hearing this made me feel greatly honored. I thought it was a tremendous favor for a wealthy family's biological mother to take me shopping, in this life. As I sat in front of the dressing table combing my hair, watching her silhouette standing behind me helping me choose hairpins in the mirror, my mind was on something else. He was taking me out today not because he loved me, but because he wanted the people of Beijing to see Su family's returned eldest daughter, wearing the heirloom bracelet, standing openly by his side. This was a declaration and a preview, declaring that the status of the Su family's eldest daughter was settled, and previewing the rationality of the bracelet changing hands in the future. 3 years later, when I died of illness, the bracelet would naturally be passed to Enine, and no one would find it strange. Sister died, and the younger sister wearing her sister's memento is so touching. I chose a plain silver hairpin, pinned my hair up, and revealed the emerald green bracelet on my left wrist. My mother's gaze lingered on the bracelet for a moment, and the corners of her mouth curved slightly. Let's go, Hunglong Plaza in Beijing, an asset owned by the Su family. As my mother linked arms with me and walked in, from the security guard at the entrance to the floor manager, everyone bowed at the exact same angle. I felt the gazes falling on me, curious, scrutinizing, flattering, all kinds. Last time, these gazes made me uncomfortable, not knowing where to put my hands. This time, I raised my chin slightly, letting my left wrist rest casually by my side, allowing the emerald bracelet to shine glaringly green under the mall's lights. Look closely at this bracelet. Remember who is wearing it now. My mother took me into a brand whose English name I couldn't even pronounce properly. The sales assistant brought out a row of dresses, and my mother held each one up against me. The goose yellow one was too bright, the navy blue too old-fashioned. In the end, she picked a pearl-white knee-length dress with a delicate silver pattern embroidered around the collar. Go try it on. She handed me the dress, her fingers brushing against my left wrist as she did so. It wasn't an accidental touch. Her fingertips landed precisely on the bracelet and lingered for about 2 seconds. She was checking its temperature. I took the dress into the fitting room, closed the door, and didn't change immediately. Instead, I raised my left hand under the light and examined the inside of the bracelet closely. Where the symbols pressed against my skin, an extremely faint red color had seeped out, as if capillaries beneath the skin had ruptured. It didn't hurt, but the temperature was indeed slightly higher than it had been in the morning. From the moment I recognized it yesterday until now, the bracelet had warmed by nearly 1 degree. The life exchange array was operating faster than last time. I didn't know if it was because of the rebirth or because, in this life, I had been conscious from the start and the bracelet had sensed something, but either way, the speed wasn't a bad thing for me. If they were in a hurry to absorb, I'd let them absorb to their heart's content. In the end, we'd see who couldn't hold out first. When I came out of the fitting room, my mother was on the phone. She had her back to me, her voice hushed, but I still caught a few words. Her temperature is normal today. Drank a whole bowl this morning. Yes, the beads are a bit warmer than yesterday. Okay, come take a look tonight. When she saw me emerge, she hung up so quickly it was as if she'd been burned. By the time she turned around, a smile was already plastered on her face. This one looks really good. I smiled back. Thank you, Mom. Come take a look tonight. The person coming tonight was the one on the other end of the phone. There weren't many people in the entire household who used the formal you when addressing my mother. My father was one, but he didn't speak to my mother in that tone. The rest, I thought of the wooden box on the altar in the attic, the densely written cinnabar characters on the yellow paper, and the obscured signature beneath those 8 words. The mage who had cast the life exchange array was coming tonight. By the time we left the mall, it was already past 4 in the afternoon. My mother received a call, said something had come up at the company, and asked the driver to take me back to the old house first. In my previous life, I would have felt disappointed, thinking my mother had just acknowledged me and was already off to work again. This time, I nodded obediently and said, okay, sitting in the back seat. I watched her figure grow smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror, as the car turned at the first intersection. Certain she could no longer see the vehicle, I raised my left wrist to my lips and gently breathed onto the bracelet. A thin mist formed on the jade surface, and the 8 characters on the inside became clearer in the haze. Life for life, blood kin as the guide. Faster, I said to the driver. We arrived at the old house at 5 in the afternoon. Auntie Wang was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and the servants were busy at their respective posts. No one noticed me. Instead of going upstairs to my room, I slipped out through the side door and entered the backyard. Behind the old Sioux family mansion lay a small garden, where a few osmanthus bushes and 2 old pomegranate trees grew. At the deepest part of the garden stood an independent single-story house with red brick walls and dark red painted wooden doors. A small bagua mirror hung above the door lintel. I had never approached this room before. Aunt Wang said it used to be the family's Buddhist shrine. When the old lady was alive, she enshrined Buddha statues there, but it had been locked ever since. However, I knew it wasn't a Buddhist shrine, because on the yellow paper in the wooden box on the attic altar, the signature area had been altered by Zhu Sha. Besides the words, perished, there was also a place name, the character, CI, from the word ancestral hall. The lock on the wooden door was an old-fashioned copper padlock. It looked sturdy, but the shackle was almost completely rusted away. I pulled a plain silver hairpin from my hair, inserted its tip into the gap between the shackle and the door frame, and pried it open with force. With a soft click, the shackle, along with a chunk of wood splinters, came loose. The door opened. The room had no windows and was as dark as a well. I turned on my phone's flashlight, and the beam swept across the space. Directly ahead was a wall, on which hung a portrait. It wasn't of Buddha or a bodhisattva, but of an old woman dressed in Republican-era clothing. It was the same person as the black and white photograph I had seen in the attic, my grandmother. In front of the portrait stood an offering table, much larger than the one in the attic. On the table were an incense burner, candlesticks, and 3 white porcelain plates containing dried fruits and pastries, all covered with a thin layer of dust. In the most prominent position at the center of the offering table lay a thread-bound booklet with a blue cloth cover, its edges frayed from frequent handling. I picked up the booklet and opened the first page. The vertical small regular script was faded but still legible. The title page bore only one line, Sioux Family Shen Lineage Life Exchange Record. Shen lineage. My grandmother's maiden name was Shen, the same as my mother's. This was no coincidence. My mother, Shen Ruohua, was the 3rd daughter of the Shen family in Gangcheng. Marrying into the Sioux family wasn't a social climb, it was a continuation of some arrangement between the 2 families. The Shen lineage, mentioned in this booklet, didn't refer only to my grandmother, but to all the Shen women who had married into the Sioux family and received that bracelet. I turned to the next pages. The first generation, Shen Suxin, married into the Sioux family in the 21st year of the Guangxu reign and died of illness at age 32 without children. After her death, the bracelet was passed to the wife of the Sioux family's 2nd son. The following year, the 2nd son's wife gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, and both mother and children were safe. The 2nd generation, Shen Yueru, married into the Sioux family in the 17th year of the Republic of China and died suddenly of illness at age 28. Before her death, she passed the bracelet to the eldest daughter-in-law, who wore it. 3 years later, the eldest daughter-in-law's chronic illness healed without medicine. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th generations, every Shen woman who had worn the bracelet died before reaching 35. Yet every Sioux family daughter-in-law who received the bracelet either recovered from illness, bore a child, or survived a disaster within 3 years. One life exchanged for another, using the blood of Shen daughters to save the fortune of the Sioux family. I turned to the last page of the booklet. It was blank, but I recognized that the paper's quality was different from the earlier pages. This space was reserved for the 6th generation, meant for my mother. No, that couldn't be right. Had my mother never worn that bracelet? She said she had worn it for over 30 years, yet there was no record of her in this booklet. I closed the booklet and returned it to its place. The phone's light swept over the drawer beneath the offering table. The drawer was unlocked. When I pulled it open, inside was a stack of envelopes tied with red string. I took out the topmost envelope. It had no recipient's name, no address, only a date written on it, August 17, 2003, 3 months before I went missing when I was 6 years old. I pulled out the letter inside. The handwriting was exactly the same as my mother's. Een has just turned 3. The time limit mentioned by the monk is approaching. The bracelet has been on his wrist for 3 years without any effect. Instead, his legs have grown weak. The monk said that since he is not the person chosen by the bracelet, we need to find a blood relative from the same source. Guobang has already sent people to look for them, but we don't know when we'll get news, if we really can't find anyone. This letter will end here. I put the letter back into the envelope, my fingers cold. Een wore the bracelet at age 3. It wasn't because she was sick and needed to exchange lives, but because the bracelet needed to exchange lives, which made Een sick. The bracelet absorbed her vitality, but since she wasn't the person chosen by the bracelet, after resting for 3 years, It couldn't absorb anymore and instead dragged her body down, so they need another blood relative, someone the bracelet is willing to accept. I was found not because Mom missed me, but because the bracelet chose me. I closed the drawer, stood up, and took one last look at the portrait on the wall. The old woman in the portrait had a slight smile, but her eyes showed no joy. She watched 5 generations of Shin family daughters enter the Su family, wear the bracelet, and lie in their coffins in their 30s. She saw it all, she knew everything. I left the room, carefully placing the copper lock and a piece of wood chip back into the keyhole, making it look like the door was still locked from afar. Then I walked through the garden, returned to the old house through the side door, and met Aunt Wang at the staircase. "Miss, your mother called. There will be guests tonight, so please change into more formal clothes." "Guests, the monk." I smiled at Aunt Wang and said, "Okay, I'll go up and change right away." At 7 o'clock in the evening, the dining room of the old house was filled with a table full of dishes. My mom had changed into a dark green qipao, her hair was styled again, and she wore an emerald hairpin. When she saw me coming down the stairs, her gaze first fell on my left wrist, confirming the bracelet was there, before moving to my face. "Wan, come here, Mom, let me introduce you." Standing next to her was a man, not my dad, but Su Guobang. He stood at the other end of the table, holding a cup of tea, with an expression of respect I had never seen before. There weren't many people in Beijing who could make Su Guobang show such an expression, but this man wasn't from Beijing. He wore a grayish-white buttoned shirt and black cloth shoes, with a string of dark red beads wrapped around his wrist. It was hard to tell his age. He could be 50 or 70. His face was clean, without wrinkles or expressions, like a stone that had been washed by water for a long time. "This is Mr. Zhou, an old friend of your grandmother." My mom's hand rested on my shoulder, her fingertips pressing slightly. "Call him Grandpa Zhou." "Hello, Grandpa Zhou." I obediently called out, "Mr. Zhou's gaze slowly moved from my face to my left wrist. The way he looked at the bracelet was different from my mom's. My mom looked at the bracelet as if it were a tool, but he looked at it as if it were a living creature. That look made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He looked at it for about 10 seconds, then raised his eyes to look at me. "Miss, you look well." "Thank you, Grandpa Zhou." I extended my hand, and my left hand was placed on my wrist. It wasn't the posture of taking a pulse, but rather directly touching the bracelet. Her palm was dry and warm, and the moment it touched the jade, I felt the inner wall of the bracelet suddenly grow hot, as if something inside had ignited. Mr. Zhou's eyebrows twitched, a very subtle movement. If I hadn't been staring intently at her face, I wouldn't have noticed her withdrawing her hand, turning around, and saying to my mother, faster than expected. My mother's breathing noticeably lightened. "Proceed as usual." Then, Mr. Zhou took his seat at the head of the dining table. Before picking up his chopsticks, he glanced at me again, a deep look, as if searching for something on my face. I don't know if he found it, but when he picked up his first bite of food, the tips of his chopsticks trembled slightly. It wasn't the trembling of an old man's hand, but a kind of excitement. The meal lasted over an hour. Mr. Zhou spoke very little, occasionally chatting with my father about business matters or asking me a few questions. Where I grew up, what my adoptive parents did, whether I had ever suffered any serious illnesses. I answered each one honestly, innocently, and naively. When dessert was served, I yawned, and my mother told me to go upstairs and rest. After going upstairs, I didn't return to my room. Instead, I stood at the corner of the second-floor staircase, the same spot where I had eavesdropped on my parents' conversation in my previous life, and pressed my ear against the gap in the wooden railing. "The bracelet has recognized him." Mr. Zhou's voice was no longer as flat as it had been at the dining table. It carried a heavy certainty, much faster than Yinin back then. Yinin wore the bracelet for 3 years before it took effect. For him, it took less than a day. "Su Guobang, your eldest daughter's constitution is a once-in-a-century spiritual vessel." A spiritual vessel. I clenched these 3 words between my teeth, chewing them one by one before swallowing them down. So it wasn't that the bracelet chose me, it was that my constitution happened to be suitable for serving as this bridge. My disappearance for 14 years wasn't an accident. After the bracelet selected me at the age of 6, someone deliberately sent me away, only to retrieve me when the day came that I was needed. "Will 3 days be enough?" my mother's voice asked. "It won't take 3 years." Mr. Zhou paused. "With his constitution, a year and a half will be enough. By then, Yinin won't just be able to stand, she'll be able to run." My mother fell silent. and the quiet stretched on for a long time. Then she asked, "Will it hurt when she goes, Mr. Joe?" Didn't answer that question. I leaned against the corridor wall, biting down on the back of my hand, not because I was sad, but because I was laughing. I was afraid I'd laugh out loud. She asked if it would hurt when I went, not whether he could be spared, not whether there was another way, just whether it would hurt. Shenruahua, your compassion is truly fucking priceless. I waited until my breathing had completely steadied before silently retreating from the corner. I didn't return to my room. Instead, I walked east along the corridor to the door of Yin Yin's room. A faint light from a nightlight seeped out from under the door, and there were very soft voices inside. I gently pushed the door open. Yin Yin was leaning against the headboard, holding her phone and looking at something. When she saw me come in, her finger quickly pressed the lock screen button, and the screen went black. "Sis, weren't you having dinner? Are you done?" I walked over and sat down by her bed, reaching out to pull up the blanket that had slipped down. The motion felt natural, exactly like the way my mom had tucked me in last time. "How are you feeling today?" "Pretty good." She put her phone under the pillow and smiled at me. Her complexion was indeed better than yesterday. Her lips had regained some color, and her eyes looked brighter. I took her right hand, my fingers resting on the string of jade beads. The beads were frighteningly hot, even hotter than yesterday. The life exchange array was accelerating, drawing energy from my wrist and pouring it into hers. "Een, how long have you been wearing these beads?" She blinked. "A long time. I've been wearing them since I got sick. Mom said they can protect me, right?" I turned the beads half a circle around her wrist. The skin underneath was pink, like it had been lightly burned by low heat. "Then you should keep wearing them. Don't take them off." She nodded obediently. I left her room, gently closing the door behind me. The corridor was quiet, and the faint sound of conversation drifted up from the dining room downstairs. I stood outside Yin Yin's door, pressing my palm against the wooden surface. Mr. Joe had said 1.5 years. With my constitution, 1.5 years would be enough. In my past life, they had taken 3 years. Back then, I was kept in the dark. Although my vitality was drained, my spirit didn't cooperate. This life is different. They can act freely now, but this life is different in more ways than one. In this life, I am awake. I return to my room and sit before the dressing table mirror. The woman in the reflection is 20 years old, her face plump, her eyes bright. I raise my left wrist. The bangle catches the light in the mirror, casting a gleam onto my collarbone. I press that light down, into my skin, into my bones. Spirit bridge fetus. I silently move my lips, addressing my reflection. "You gave me this name, and I have remembered it. 1.5 years, Mr. Joe, Shenruahua, Su-in. You think 1.5 years is enough to exchange my life away. That is because you do not know that besides being suitable as a bridge, the spirit bridge fetus has another characteristic." In the Shen family's record of life exchange from the Su clan, next to the words, "spirit bridge," there was a small annotation. I did not see it clearly under the lamplight at the time, but I memorized the stroke outline of those characters on the way back to my room. I kept reconstructing it in my mind, piecing it together stroke by stroke until 7 characters emerged. It can also backfire. Use with caution. I press my left wrist against my chest, feeling the bangle's warmth and the resonance of my heartbeat. 1 beat, 2 beats, 3 beats. Go ahead and absorb it. Wait until the day you are most triumphant. Wait until the day Een can stand and walk. I slip this bangle under her mattress, so you can witness with your own eyes what backfire means. Another ginkgo leaf falls outside the window. I turn off the light. In the darkness, my eyes adjust. From downstairs comes the sound of guests taking their leave. Mr. Joe's footsteps crunch over the fallen leaves in the courtyard, rustling farther and farther away. But he will come again, for he is the designer of this illness's plot. He wants to watch with his own eyes as the trap he laid unfolds step by step to its end. At that time, I will send him a grand gift, a package he himself wrote in the annotation, believing no one would ever see it. The following week, I lived like a gecko clinging to the wall, motionless and silent, yet observing everything. Every morning at 7 sharp, my mother would push open my door, holding a bowl of bird's nest soup. The smell of Angelica grew stronger with each passing day. As usual, I drank every last drop, then flashed her a sweet smile. Her movements, checking my forehead and testing the temperature of my bracelet, became increasingly practiced. Sometimes, she didn't even bother to hide it from me, placing her fingers on my wrist for 3 seconds before withdrawing them and turning to leave, like a nurse making rounds. It didn't feel like a mother looking at her daughter, but I didn't expose her, because I was waiting for two things. First, to figure out exactly how to carry out the counterattack Mr. Zhou had mentioned. I had only skimmed through that Sue mentions life exchange record once, and the annotations were too small, many details remained unclear. I had to get into that room in the backyard again, but for some reason, Auntie Wang had been keeping a close watch on the backyard these past few days, as if someone had given her specific instructions. Second, since that day with Yin, I had been visiting her room every day, sometimes bringing a bowl of white fungus soup, sometimes a few magazines, and sometimes nothing at all, just sitting by her bed and talking to her. She had grown increasingly unguarded around me, or perhaps she thought I was unguarded around her. On the afternoon of the 4th day since my rebirth, I carried the freshly brewed medicine from the kitchen into Yinin's room. It was the same large, pitch-black bowl she had to drink every day, smelling both bitter and pungent. Usually, it was Auntie Wang or my mother who brought it up, but today I volunteered for the task. When Auntie Wang handed me the tray, I said, "I'll take it up. I was just going to keep Yinin company anyway." My mother glanced at me, hesitated for a moment, then handed the tray over. I noticed that moment of hesitation. She was assessing whether it was safe for me to handle Yinin's medicine alone, but her judgment was based on the assumption that Su Wan knew nothing, so she nodded, carrying the medicine upstairs. I paused at the corner of the 2nd floor. The hallway was empty, and there was no sound from downstairs. I set the bowl on the windowsill, pulled out a tiny sealed bag from my pocket, and sprinkled in some crushed ginkgo leaves I had picked from the garden and dried for 2 days. Ginkgo leaves themselves aren't poisonous, but when combined with certain ingredients in Yinin's prescription, they could extend her drowsiness from half an hour to 2 hours. I wasn't trying to poison her, I just needed her to sleep deeply enough. I stirred the crushed leaves into the medicine with a spoon, and the dark liquid concealed all traces. When Yinin saw me enter with the medicine, her expression remained as sweet and obedient as ever. "Thank you, sis. It's so much trouble for you every day." "What are you talking about? You're my sister," I replied, handing her the bowl. She took it and began sipping slowly. As she drank, her brows furrowed slightly, and the corners of her mouth turned down, like any ordinary 7-year-old girl who disliked bitter medicine. After drinking the last sip, he lifted his eyes and glanced at me. Something flickered in that look, something I couldn't quite name. As if it were a kind of confirmation, he handed me the empty bowl. "Sister, can you stay with me a little longer today? I'm so bored lying here alone." Of course, I took the bowl and placed it on the bedside table, then sat down by the bed, holding her right hand. The string of jade beads felt scalding, as though they had just been pulled out of warm water, and their temperature was even higher than yesterday. My left wrist was also growing warm, as if an invisible thread connected the bracelet and the beads. Growing tighter and tighter, she leaned back against the pillow, her upper eyelids beginning to droop. Yin smiled faintly. "Sister, what were you like when you were little and living in the countryside?" His voice became thick and sticky, as if he were holding half a mouthful of syrup, bitter and heavy. I gathered her hand in my palm. In winter, my hands were covered in chilblains, cracked open, and bleeding whenever I touched cold water. My adoptive parents treated me reasonably well, but they were poor. I dropped out of middle school and went to work in an electronics factory, standing for 12 hours a day, soldering circuit boards until my eyes blurred. Yin's eyelashes fluttered slightly. She was already half asleep. "Then since you've finally come back, you must enjoy your blessings." "Yes." I gently patted the back of her hand, as if coaxing a real patient to sleep. "So, sister won't go anywhere." Her breathing grew long and even, her lips slightly parted, and she fell into a deep sleep. The sedative ingredients in the medicine Yin's family had given him would keep him unconscious for at least 2 hours. I placed her hand back under the covers and stood up. I didn't leave. Instead, I walked to the wardrobe in her room, opened the door, and saw several loungewear outfits and nightgowns hanging inside, along with folded blankets and spare bed sheets. I reached beneath the bottom layer of the folded blankets and touched something hard, a diary. It had a plastic cover, pink in color, with a small lock, though the lock had long been pried open. Yin, a girl who had been bedridden for 12 years, had hidden her diary so deeply, making it inaccessible to others. I opened the first page. The date was from 2017. When he was 13 years old, Mom cried again today. She said that as long as sister is still not found, my illness won't heal. I asked Mom if my sickness would get better once sister is found. Mom didn't say anything. In 2018, the master came today. He talked for a long time in Mom's study. Through the crack in the door, I saw Mom nodding all the time. That night, Mom came to see me. She stroked my hair and said, "Eneen, hang in there a little longer, it's almost over. What is happiness?" In 2019, many people came to the house today. They said sister was found, but later Mom came back and said it was a mistake. It wasn't sister. I saw Dad smash a teacup. Mom said it didn't matter, keep looking for her. I asked Mom, will I die after sister is found? Mom said no. She said that once sister comes back, Eneen will be able to stand up. I don't understand. In 2020, she was 15. Mom brought back a string of beads today and put them on my hand. The beads were beautiful, a deep, vivid green. After putting them on, I felt a little warmer all over, and my hands could move again. Mom cried with joy. I asked where the beads came from. Mom said they were from the same stone as sister's bracelet, so sister has a bracelet too, but sister hasn't been found yet. My fingers pausing while turning the page froze for a moment. In 2020, when Eneen put on the beads, I was still soldering circuit boards in the electronics factory. The bracelet hadn't been put on my hand yet, but the life exchange formation had already started. The bracelet and the beads are a set. The beads are first worn by Eneen to warm and nourish them. Once they can find me, the bracelet will be put on. Once the bracelet is put on, the entire formation will activate. I turned the diary to the last page. The date was the day of recognizing kin. Sister came back. She looked just like in the photo, even more beautiful than the photo. When Mom put the bracelet on her wrist, my beads suddenly became extremely hot. I almost cried out, but after the heat subsided, I felt something in my legs, which had been numb for 12 years, tingled. Sister, you're finally back. I'm sorry. The last 3 words were blurred on the paper by water stains, likely tears. I closed the diary and put it back under the blanket. I closed the cabinet door, then walked to Eneen's bedside, looking down at her. Sleeping Eneen's face lacked those obedient, ingratiating expressions. It was just a pale, thin face belonging to a 17-year-old girl. She wrote in the diary, "I'm sorry." She knew what it meant for the bracelet to be put on my hand. She wasn't completely kept in the dark, but she also drank that bowl of medicine, wore that string of beads, and when my mom asked her, "How is sister doing?" she asked a question that, "I'm sorry," is true, but it's also true that she didn't leave a single drop of the lotus root powder that night. I gently put her hand, which was exposed outside the blanket, back into the covers. The time gained by the ginkgo leaves is not much. I have to take advantage of the 2 hours to go to one place, the attic. During the day, the attic feels completely different from at night. Sunlight streams in through the skylight, dust slowly rotating in the beams. The incense burner and candlesticks on the offering table sit quietly. The old lady in the black and white photo has half her face illuminated by the light. I walked straight to the offering table, picked up the wooden box, and opened it. The yellow paper was still there, the silver needles were still there, and the jade scraps were still there. I took out the yellow paper and unfolded it, finding the small characters, "reverse backlash, use with caution," and took a photo with my phone. Then I turned the box over. There was a velvet pad at the bottom of the box. I first lifted the pad. Pressed underneath was a thin piece of paper. The paper quality was different from the yellow paper. It was modern A4 printer paper, folded to the size of a palm. I unfolded the paper. The characters on it were printed in song typeface. The title had 6 characters, "Reverse Operation Method for Life Exchange Formation." My heartbeat skipped a beat. I read the specific methods for reverse backlash line by line. To reverse the life exchange formation, 3 conditions must be met. First, the practitioner must have a spiritual constitution, and the bracelet must recognize them as its master. Second, a reverse wedge must be established between the main chi and the auxiliary chi. Take 3 drops of blood from the practitioner's fingertips, tie them onto the auxiliary chi. The location of the auxiliary chi is the heart of the formation. Third, after the reverse wedge is established, the direction of the life exchange reverses. The original recipient's life force will be drawn back. The main chi practitioner will recover, or even reverse the condition. It cannot be stopped. It ends only when the life force of one party is completely exhausted. It ends only when the life force of one party is completely exhausted, if he doesn't die. I live. I folded the paper back up and put it away, replaced the gasket, and restored the wooden box to its original state. Then I stood up and bowed to the black and white photo on the altar. I didn't know what role my grandmother had played in all this, but she had hidden this printed paper at the bottom of the river instead of destroying it. She had left a path, and regardless of her stance back then, I would take it. After coming down from the attic, I went back to my room to change clothes. Just as I finished changing, my mother knocked and came in. Eneen was asleep, and she asked casually, but her eyes swept over my face. I drank the medicine and went to sleep, sleeping very deeply. I sat in front of the dressing table combing my hair, watching him in the mirror. That's good. She walked up behind me, placed her hands on my shoulders, and looked down at the bracelet on my left wrist. The bracelet was an unusually deep green today, as if it had absorbed something. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Wan, Mr. Zhou will come again tomorrow to take your pulse and check your physical condition. Taking the pulse is to observe the operation of the fate exchange array. Sure, I smiled at him in the mirror. Mr. Zhou is a good person. That night, after the entire old house had quieted down, I took a sewing needle from the sewing box. I wiped the tip of my left index finger with an alcohol swab, and when the needle touched my skin, I hesitated for a second. It wasn't the pain I was afraid of. I had endured the pain of late-stage pancreatic cancer in my past life, so what was a needle prick? What made me hesitate was that once this needle pierced my skin, there would be no turning back. The needle tip broke the skin, and a dark red drop of blood welled up. I counted. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops, as they fell into the small porcelain bottle I had prepared in advance. Then I pressed a cotton swab against the puncture to stop the bleeding and tucked the small porcelain bottle under my pillow. Tomorrow, when I went to see Eneen, I would smear these 3 drops of blood on her bracelet, a reverse wedge induction to establish the transfer of the array's focal point. Then I would wait for the right moment, for the first signs of decline in Eneen's body, for Mr. Zhou and my mother to notice something was wrong, for them to focus all their attention on Eneen. At that time, I would slip the bracelet off my wrist and hide it under Eneen's mattress, with the primary and auxiliary energies in the same place. The fate exchange array would operate in reverse, doubling the vitality drawn back. You used 1.5 years to drain me. I'll take it back in a month. Fair enough. The next morning, Mr. Zhou indeed came. This time, he didn't eat at the old house but was invited by my mother into the study on the 2nd floor. I was told to wait in the room, as Mr. Zhou wanted to examine me alone. The study door was closed, the curtains drawn. Mr. Zhou sat in a rosewood chair, with a pulse pillow placed on the tea table in front of him. I rested my left wrist on it, and the bracelet made a faint clinking sound as it touched the silk surface of the pillow. Mr. Zhou placed 3 fingers on my wrist, his eyes closed, breathing slowly. The temperature of his fingertips was even colder than last time, as if blood didn't flow to the extremities. After about 3 minutes, his brow furrowed slightly. Young miss, have you felt any warmth in your wrist recently? Yes, I answered honestly, especially when sleeping at night. It gets so hot sometimes that I can't fall asleep. His eyes opened a slit. Are there any other discomforts in your body? I thought for a moment. Just a bit sleepy, always wanting to sleep during the day. His fingers moved away from my wrist, and he turned to my mother, saying 2 words, normal. My mother's tense shoulders relaxed. Mr. Zhou stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. Young miss has a unique constitution. The bracelet has taken root deeply, so the reaction will be more pronounced than in others. Drowsiness is normal. It means the flow of vitality is smooth. In another month or 2, even the drowsiness will disappear. It will disappear because by then, the body will have been drained, unable to even produce the sensation of sleepiness. That's how it was in my previous life. In the last 3 months, I couldn't even feel pain, like a piece of wood slowly drying out. Thank you, Grandpa Zhou. I withdrew my wrist, stood up, and smiled sweetly at him. Mr. Zhou looked at my smile, and something flickered in his eyes. I couldn't tell if it was pity or vigilance, or perhaps both. He didn't say anything more, nodded to my mother, and walked out of the study. When my mother escorted me back to my room, she paused in the hallway. Wan, Mom wants to talk to you about something. What is it? Next month, I want to take you to Hong Kong to meet your maternal grandmother's family. She held my hand, her thumb gently stroking the back of it. The Shen family is a prominent clan in Hong Kong. Your grandmother has always been thinking of you. Let's go stay for a few days so she can see you. The Shen family in Hong Kong, the family that specializes in producing bracelet wearers. For 5 generations, Shen daughters have married into the Su family, only to lie in coffins by their 30s. Now it's my turn. She wants to take me back to the Shen family. For whom to see? For the next Shen daughter destined to take my place, so they can see how the bracelet is put on and not be clumsy when their own time comes. Sure, I leaned against her shoulder. I had never been to Gangcheng. I felt her chin resting on top of my head, her breath brushing through my hair. If I didn't know the truth, this posture would truly resemble a mother holding her daughter, warm, soft, making one want to close their eyes and just lean on mom like that. I closed my eyes and called out to her, "Do you love me?" Her body stiffened for about half a second. It was extremely brief, so short that if I hadn't had every nerve in my body tensed, waiting for this answer, I wouldn't have noticed it at all. Then her hand came to rest on the back of my head, stroking my hair gently, one stroke after another. "Silly child, you are the flesh and blood that fell from my body, how could I not love you?" I buried my face in the crook of her shoulder and mumbled a dull "When you said you loved me, your hand was stroking my hair, but where were your eyes looking?" "At the bracelet, you were touching my hair, but measuring the temperature of the bracelet, Shinruahua, the piece of flesh and blood that fell from your body is now being drained bit by an emerald bangle. You saw the bracelet you pushed yourself." In the days that followed, I continued to visit Inin's room every day as usual. I only ever put a very small amount of the ginkgo leaf fragments, just enough to make him sleep an extra half hour, insufficient to arouse anyone's suspicion. When she was awake, I chatted with him about things in the countryside, about the electronics factory, about how sweet the persimmons were on the persimmon tree at our parents' home. He listened very attentively, sometimes smiling, his eyes curving into crescents, like a normal girl without any worries. One day, he suddenly asked me, "Sister, do you hate her?" "Hate what?" "This matter of getting lost. If it weren't for getting lost, you wouldn't have had to suffer so much." I looked into his eyes. As he asked this, his right hand was unconsciously turning, and the emerald beads on his left wrist were spinning round and round. It was a nervous tic of his, something he probably didn't even realize himself. "I don't hate her," I smiled at him. "Only by getting lost could I be found. Only by being found could I have a mother. Having you, I feel it was all worth it." Her fingers stopped, the beads on her wrist grew still, a small string of emerald green pressing against pale skin. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but in the end, she just held my hand a little tighter. "Sister, you are so good. Are you my sister?" That night, back in my room, I sat in the darkness and felt for the small porcelain bottle from under my pillow. The 3 drops of blood had already dried into dark red scars, sticking to the inner walls of the bottle. I turned the bottle in the moonlight, then tightened the stopper and tucked it back under the pillow. Wait a little longer. It wasn't time yet, because the beads on the wrist weren't hot enough yet. My mother wasn't yet reassured when measuring the bracelet's temperature, and Mr. Zhou's frown wasn't yet relaxed when taking his pulse. Wait until they feel that everything is under control, until their guard is lowered to the minimum. That is the best time to strike. I closed my eyes, pressing my left wrist against my chest. The temperature of the bangle pulsed beat by beat, perfectly synchronized with my heartbeat. He is sucking it in. The more he sucks, the more severe the backlash will be when the reverse attraction occurs. There was a line of text in the reverse operation method of the life exchange array, which I didn't tell my mother, nor did I tell anyone. On the back of that printed sheet of paper, there was another line of handwritten supplementary notes in fountain pen, the ink dark red, like dried blood. If the reverse wedge attraction succeeds, the practitioner can choose one of 2 paths. First, recover the lost vitality and return to normal. Second, demand double compensation, with the subject bearing double the cost. Double compensation, double cost. Ini owes me 3 years of lifespan. Double compensation means 6 years. He is 17 this year, and has been lying in bed for 12 years. If another 6 years of vitality are drained from him, what will he become? I mentally rehearsed the words on the back of that printed paper once more, then moved my left hand away from my chest and turned over to face the window. Outside, the ginkgo tree had begun shedding its leaves, golden pieces drifting down one by one, settling on the bluish brick ground. Autumn had arrived. Last time I died in autumn. This life, I would make autumn someone else's season. The opportunity came faster than I expected. The date for the trip to Harbor City was set, November 3rd, just 5 days away. My mother said we'd be staying in Harbor City for a full week and told me to bring everything I needed to wear. As she spoke, her gaze lingered on my left wrist for a full 5 seconds. I understood her meaning. The bracelet had to be worn. It must never leave my body. These past few days, the old mansion had grown busy. My mother directed the servants in packing luggage, went out daily to purchase gifts for Harbor City, while my father continued his routine of leaving early and returning late. Everyone in the Sioux household, except those bedridden and immobile, was preparing for this trip. With everyone occupied, Fewer eyes were on me on the evening of November 1st, 2 days before departure. The servants of the old mansion had worked all day and retired to their rooms before 10 o'clock. The master bedroom door closed early. My mother had been exhausted these past few days, even changing her nightly habit of checking the bracelet's temperature in my room to a single morning check instead. I waited until all the lights in the mansion were out, then waited nearly another hour. Before retrieving the small porcelain bottle from under my pillow, the hallway was pitch black, not a finger visible. The wooden floorboards of the old mansion creaked when stepped on, but I had memorized every noisy spot. The 7th, the 11th, the 15th, I walked around them, barefoot, step by step on the silent spots, like a cat treading on roof tiles. Eneen's room was at the end of the hallway, the door unlocked. It never was. Who would guard against a bedridden patient of 12 years escaping? I gently pushed the door open, slipped inside, and closed it exactly as it was. The small nightlight by the bed was on, casting a dim yellow glow over Eneen's face. He was sleeping deeply, breathing evenly, lips slightly parted, his right hand resting on the quilt, the string of jade beads lying quietly on his wrist. I pulled the stopper from the small porcelain bottle, dipped a cotton swab inside, and swabbed the 3 drops of blood. They had dried, but a dark red residue still clung to the inner wall of the bottle. The cotton swab brushed against it, picking up a faint trace of blood. Enough. Reverse soul transference didn't require volume of blood, but the essence within it. The reverse method of the life exchange array was clear. Take 3 drops of fingertip blood, apply to the abdomen. Once the blood essence dries, the chi remains without dissipating. I gently pressed the cotton swab against the jade beads on Eneen's right wrist. The beads were smooth and cool to the touch. The application was almost invisible, leaving only a faint, water-like mark. I rotated the cotton swab around the beads for half a circle, ensuring each bead was coated with a layer of aura. When I finished applying it to the last bead, the beads suddenly grew hot, not gradually warming up, but scalding me all at once, as if branded by an iron. My fingers instinctively recoiled. Looking down, I saw the temperature of the bead's surface rising rapidly, from warm to scalding. In just a few breaths, Eneen frowned slightly in her sleep, her right hand twitching unconsciously, but she did not wake. The beads remained hot for about half a minute, then the temperature began to drop, from scalding to warm, from warm to slightly cool, finally stabilizing at a temperature slightly higher than normal body temperature. It was lower than at any previous moment. The reverse wedge had been established. From now on, this string of beads was no longer a receiver, it was a transmitter. The vitality absorbed by the bracelet would no longer flow to Eneen but would be drawn back in reverse by the beads. However, since the beads were still on Eneen's wrist, they would first draw from her. I stood by her bedside, looking down at her, Eneen's brow furrowed even tighter in her sleep, her lips moving slightly as if she were having a bad dream. Her complexion was slightly paler than when she went to sleep, not a healthy pallor, but the whiteness that remains after a layer of blood color has been drained. The change was subtle, so subtle that no one but me would notice, but my mother would discover it tomorrow morning when she wiped Eneen's face, and tomorrow night when she fed her medicine, and the day after tomorrow morning when Mr. Shaw was urgently summoned. I put the cotton swab in my pocket, turned, and walked out of the room. The corridor was still dark. I stepped carefully on those few silent wooden boards, walking back step by step to my own room. Closing the door, I leaned against it for a long time. The bracelet on my left wrist was still warm, its temperature unchanged. After the reverse wedge was established, the bracelet did not stop working. It continued to draw vitality from my body, but where was that vitality going? Not to Eneen's beads. The beads were now transmitters and would no longer receive anything. The vitality drawn out by the bracelet was dissipating in the air, like water poured into a desert, unable to reach anywhere. This was my price, after the reverse wedge was established. Until the transfer of the array's core was complete, all the vitality drawn by the bracelet was wasted. I was using the vitality flowing out of my own body to buy a window of time when they would be caught off guard. Was it worth it? Yes, because when they discovered Eneen's problem, their first reaction would not be to suspect me, but to suspect the life exchange array itself. Mr. Shaw would repeatedly inspect every aspect of the array. My mother would guard Eneen's bedside, never leaving her side. Everyone's attention would be focused on how to restore the array to normal. No one would notice that the obedient eldest daughter, who served bird's nest and snow fungus soup every day, was waiting for a moment when everyone was absent. Once that moment arrived, I would take off the bracelet and slip it under Eneen's mattress. with the main and auxiliary energies in the same place, the reverse wedge would be fully activated, and the double compensation would begin. By then, even if Mr. Zhou came personally, he would be unable to stop it. The next morning, I went to Yinin's room as usual. Mom was wiping her face with a towel that was only half wrung out, moving from her forehead down to her chin, and when she reached her neck, Aunt Wang's hand paused. "Miss Third," she said, "you didn't sleep well last night, did you? Your complexion looks off." Yinin leaned back against the pillow and forced a smile. "No, I slept just fine." Her complexion was indeed unusual. Not the fatigue of a sleepless night, but a grayish pallor that seemed to emanate from within, like an oil lamp whose wick had been twisted down by half a turn. The flame remained the same, but its light had dimmed. I walked over, placed the bowl of white fungus soup I was holding on the bedside table, and naturally took her hand. The beads were cool, not icy cold, but just a touch cooler than body temperature, like stones freshly pulled from cold water. When my fingers touched the beads, she shivered slightly. "Sister, your hands are so warm, aren't they?" I cupped her hands in mine, feeling the beads gradually warm up in my palms. They weren't heating themselves, it was my body heat that was warming them. They no longer generated their own warmth. Less than 8 hours have passed since the reverse wedge was established. Yinin's complexion has already changed, and the warmth in her beads has faded. The reversal speed of the life exchange array is faster than I anticipated. Perhaps she kicked off the blanket last night, so I pulled it up to cover her shoulders. "Sleep a little longer today, don't overthink things." Yin Guai obediently nodded. I watched her lean back against the pillow, her upper eyelids drooping again. This time, I didn't use the ginkgo leaf. He fell asleep on his own. When the vitality within his body was being drawn out in reverse, his first reaction was drowsiness. It was exactly the same as the 3rd month after I first put on the bracelet and began testing sleep. That afternoon, my mother came home early. I was on the 2nd floor and heard her footsteps on the stairs, faster than usual, her leather heels tapping sharply and urgently against the wooden boards. She didn't come to my room first but went straight to the end of the hallway. I followed and stood at the door, which wasn't fully closed. My mother was sitting by Yin Yin's bedside, one hand resting on Yin Ying's forehead, the other holding that string of beads. Her back was rigidly straight, her shoulders stiff as iron plates. My mother said, "You don't look well today. Tell me, where do you feel unwell?" "I'm not unwell, just a little tired." Yin Ying's voice was soft and faint. "Mom, I'm fine, don't worry." My mother fell silent for a few seconds, then stood up. When she turned around, I saw her face. Her expression remained calm, but the muscle at the corner of her mouth was twitching, jumping uncontrollably. Seeing me standing at the door, she was momentarily stunned, then quickly adjusted her expression to a gentle, motherly tone. "Wan, when did you get here?" "Just now." I walked in, shifting my gaze from her face to Yin Yin's. "Sister, what's wrong?" Auntie Wang said she doesn't look too well. "It's nothing, probably just a bit tired from the change of seasons." My mother patted my arm. "Go back to your room and rest first. I'll stay with Yin for a while." "Okay." I turned and walked out. When I reached the door, I glanced back. My mother had already sat back down by the bed. She held the string of beads in her palm, her thumb rubbing them one by one, as if counting prayer beads. Her lips were moving, but her voice was too soft for me to hear. Judging by the shape of her mouth, she was reciting Mr. Zhou's name. That night, around 9 o'clock, Mr. Zhou's car pulled up at the entrance of the old house. Looking down from the 2nd floor window, I saw his grayish-white mandarin jacket emerge from the black sedan. He crossed the courtyard, passing through the shadows of the ginkgo trees, and was personally welcomed inside by my mother. They didn't go to the living room but went directly upstairs to the study on the 2nd floor. I stood at the door of my room. The hallway was empty. Light from the study seeped out from under the door, forming a thin line. I left my door slightly ajar, pressing my ear to the crack. Voices from the study drifted over intermittently. The temperature of the beads started dropping last night, and by this morning, they were completely cold. My mother's voice was very low but spoke extremely fast. Yin Yin's complexion has worsened too. Over the course of the day, all the color has drained from her lips. Has something gone wrong with the array, Mr. Zhou? Mr. Zhou didn't answer immediately. The silence lasted for about the time it takes to smoke half a cigarette. Then his voice came, very slow, each word seeming to be weighed carefully in his mouth. "As for the bracelet, its temperature hasn't dropped. It's the same as before." Another silence followed, this one longer. "The bracelet was fine, but the beads had turned cold, Mr. Zhou's voice grew heavy. This isn't an issue with the formation. If the formation were faulty, both the primary and secondary qi would fail simultaneously. Now the primary qi is functioning normally, but the secondary qi, it's causing reverse cooling. Has someone tampered with it? Tampered with the secondary qi? Impossible. My mother's voice rose half a tone, then was forcibly suppressed. Yinin's beads have never been taken off. No one except my mother and me had entered her room, though. Wan went in every day. She stopped mid-sentence. I leaned against the wall by the door, my heartbeat steady. Once, twice, 3 times, calm and unhurried. He had guessed, or at least begun to suspect, but so what? The reverse wedge drawing had already been established, and the beads were already draining vitality from Yinin. Even if he cut the beads off Yinin's wrist now, it would be too late. Once the evil lust was established and the secondary qi left the body, the draining speed would only accelerate. The manual on reverse operation of the life exchange formation clearly stated, blood shadow inheritance, secondary qi departure doubles the effect without resistance, yet the director had invited the eldest young lady here. Mr. Zhou's voice. I gently closed the door and returned to sit by the bed. 10 seconds later, there was a knock. Has Wan gone to sleep? Mom needs to talk to you about something. I opened the door, rubbed my eyes, and adjusted my voice to the hoarse tone of someone just awakened. Mom, what's wrong? In the study, Mr. Zhou sat on a rosewood chair, with the pulse pillow placed on the coffee table in front of him. I walked over, extended my left wrist, and let the bracelet touch the bed surface, making a faint tapping sound. Mr. Zhou placed 3 fingers on my wrist, eyes closed, motionless. This time, the pulse-taking lasted unusually long. Long enough for my mother to shift her stance 3 times beside me, walk over to the old grandfather clock in the corner of the study, and listen to its ticking for nearly 200 beats. Then he opened his eyes, looking not at the table, but directly into mine. Eldest young lady, have you recently touched the beads on Yinin's wrist? Touched them? Yes, I said it with complete confidence. I hold her hand every day, and the beads are on her wrist. They're bound to touch. So what? Mr. Zhou's gaze lingered on my face for a long time. Long enough that most people would feel guilty, lower their eyes, or avoid his stare, but I didn't. In my past life, right before I died, I smiled at my mother's loving face for half a month straight. Acting skills like mine were personally trained by the King of Hell. It's nothing. He moved his fingers away from my wrist, turned around, and said to my mother, Miss, there's no problem. The bracelet is functioning normally, and the vital energy within her body continues to flow steadily. The problem lies on the auxiliary gas side. My mother's hand, gripping the side seam of the Chong Sam, turned pale. So what do we do now? I need to check Yin's room. They went to the end of the corridor, and I didn't follow. I stood at the doorway of the study, watching Mr. Zhou and my mother's figures disappear behind Yin's bedroom door. Then I returned to my own room, closed the door, and sat on the bed. The jade bracelet on my left wrist glowed a deep, steady green under the light. Its temperature stable and its operation normal. The reverse evil yang energy that Mr. Zhou could not detect was established through my blood. The bracelet recognizes me as its master. My blood is its blood, governing its qi, so it does not reject its master's blood. Thus, the bracelet functions perfectly. The blood silver from the fortune-bestowing talisman has already seeped into the internal structure of the jade beads. Unless the beads are shattered and ground into powder, no one can detect the layer of aura thinner than paper. The only thing he can uncover is that the formation has been reversed. He cannot trace its origin, nor can he find the antidote, because the final line of the reverse operation method for the life exchange formation is precisely the last line written in pen on that printed sheet I saw in the wooden box in the attic that day. Once reversal begins, it cannot be halted. Even if the primary energy is destroyed, the growth of fortune will continue. When one side's vitality is exhausted, the formation will dissipate on its own. Yin is 17 years old this year and has been bedridden for 12 years. Her physical foundation is as thin as a sheet of rice paper. The vitality she absorbed from the table amounts to, at most, the 3 years from her previous life. In this life, the reverse wedge connection has been established for less than 24 hours, yet her complexion has already deteriorated by at least a month. The bead will drain every last trace of his meager vitality. By then, Mr. Zhou will face a choice: either watch Yin be drained dry, or take action to accelerate the process on the other end, which is me. He cannot touch the bracelet because it recognizes me as its master, nor can he touch the bead because it is demanding double compensation. The only thing he can move is me. I raised my left hand to eye level, slowly turning my wrist under the light. The emerald refracted a green glow onto the wall, like a pool of flowing deep water. The 8 characters inscribed on the inner wall of the bracelet were as clear as if freshly carved under the light. Mr. Zhou, I whispered softly into that green glow, are you wondering if the spell would stop if the caster were eliminated? It won't. On the back of that printed sheet was another line, written in dark red ink, tucked into the farthest corner, nearly swallowed by the paper's grain. Should the caster perish before the quake's epicenter, the curse shall double and transfer to the blood kin of the subject, blood kin, who are Yin Yin's blood kin, my mother, Shenruohua, my father, Su Guobang. None of your family of 3 will escape. I pressed the bracelet to my chest, feeling its rhythmic pulse. Outside the window, ginkgo leaves covered the ground, their golden hues spread over the blue bricks, rustling lightly in the night breeze. The light was still on in the room at the end of the hallway. Mr. Zhou was still inside, probably wrestling with the predetermined outcome written on that printed sheet, using all his lifelong knowledge. Scream all you want, the longer you scream, the more vitality is drained from Yin Yin. I lay down, pulling the blanket up to my chin, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, my mother would start frantically brewing tonics for me, not to nourish me, but to replenish what the bracelet had taken, giving the life exchange spell more to feed on. She'd pile ginseng, deer antler, and donkey hide gelatin on my nightstand, force me to drink medicinal soups 3 times a day, and watch me with eyes that seemed desperate to give me everything. Last time, that look moved me to tears in secret. This time, I'd only find it laughable. Shenruohua, every bit of nourishment you're desperately pouring into me now will be sucked away by the bracelet, then doubled and hammered back onto Yin Yin through the reverse wedge. The more you indulge, the faster Yin Yin collapses. You're nailing the coffin shut for Yin Yin, one nail after another, each driven deep and tight, and the final nail will be hammered by my own hand. That time hasn't come yet. It'll come. When your pallor grows so cold even foundation can't hide it, when Mr. Zhou is so desperate he starts rummaging for that Su-mentioned life exchange manual, when my mother is too frantic to remember checking the bracelet's temperature daily, that's when I'll walk into Yin Yin's room, slip the bracelet off my wrist, and tuck it under her mattress. 1 minute is all it takes. I extended my left hand from under the blanket. Moonlight fell on the bracelet, glowing like a wide-open green eye. I mouthed silently at that eye. Soon, the trip to Harbor City never happened. On the morning of November 2nd, when my mother knocked on my door, dark circles hung under her eyes. She said something urgent had come up in Harbor City, so the trip was postponed. She smiled as she said it, her lips curving upward, but the purplish shadows beneath her eyes didn't lie. She hadn't slept all night, neither had I, though I'd slept just fine. That's good, I'll stay home and keep Yin company a little longer. I took the bird's nest she handed me and drank it in front of her, sip by sip. The angelica flavor was 3 times stronger than usual, bitter enough to numb my tongue. She was panicking, doubling the blood circulation drugs, desperate for the bracelet to drain a month's worth of vitality from me in a day, just to patch the hole in Yin Yin's side. Wan Wan is so well behaved. She stroked my hair, her fingers sliding down to my left wrist, lingering on the bracelet for 5 seconds to check its temperature. The bracelet's temperature was normal, its function was normal, everything was normal. Her brow furrowed for a split second before smoothing over. Of course it's normal, the bracelet was never broken, it was the beads that were the problem. He turned Yin Yin's beads over and over, inspecting them countless times. Mr. Zhou probably tried every method to test them, but nothing showed up. Because reverse attraction isn't destruction, it's reversal, the formation itself remains intact, only its direction has flipped. It's like a river still flowing, just changing from eastward to westward. Standing on the bank, you see water as water, waves as waves. Nothing appears out of place. But as she continued crying, on November 3rd, Yin could no longer hold the spoon herself to eat porridge. When her mother fed her, she took 2 bites, then shook her head, saying she was full. Turning her face away and burying it in the pillow, I took the porridge bowl from my mother's hands, sat by the bed, scooped a spoonful, blew on it to cool it, and brought it to Yin Yin's lips. She drank 1 spoonful after another. She opened her eyes to look at me, her pupils seeming clouded with a thin haze. Her once clear black and white eyes had turned gray and dull. She opened her mouth, and I seized the opportunity to slip the spoon in. She swallowed very slowly, her throat moving with each gulp taking 2 or 3 seconds. Sister, her voice became thin and hoarse, like a radio tuned to the wrong station. Am I dying soon? Don't talk nonsense. I gently wiped the corner of her mouth with my thumb, saying softly, it's just seasonal fatigue, rest for a few days, and you'll be fine. She didn't speak again, and her eyes slowly closed. Before falling asleep, her right hand unconsciously groped on the blanket. I looked down at her fingers, which were tracing the beads on her left wrist, one by one. Those were beads she had worn for over 3 years, and she had long grown accustomed to the weight of them on her wrist, but the way she touched the beads was different now. Previously, she would absent-mindedly twirl them for comfort. Now, she was checking to make sure they were still there. She must have also noticed that the warmth of the beads on her wrist was gradually decreasing, like a ring of cooling irons. She didn't know the reason, but she knew her body was growing colder along with the beads. I placed her hand back under the covers, picked up the porridge bowl, and walked out of the room. In the hallway, I ran into Mr. Joe. He stood at the top of the stairs, wearing a grayish-white traditional jacket with dark red beads on his wrist. The expression on his face was like a towel wrung dry. He looked at me, and I looked at him. Young miss. As Grandpa Joe passed by, his voice came from behind, very soft and flat, like a blade that had never been sharpened. Young miss, some things, once done, cannot be undone. I stopped but did not turn around. Grandpa Joe, I don't understand what you're saying. It's best if you don't understand. His footsteps headed toward Yin Yin's room. The cloth soles of his shoes scraped against the wooden floor, the sound light and fragmented, like autumn leaves being crushed underfoot. On November 5th, Yin Yin started running a fever. It wasn't a high fever, just around 37.8 degrees C or 37.9 degrees C, but it lingered, burning low from afternoon until midnight. Mr. Joe stayed by her bedside, my mother stayed by her bedside, and the family doctor was called twice. Blood was drawn, and all indicators were tested, but nothing abnormal was found. No infection, no inflammation, and her immune system was functioning normally. She was simply burning up for no reason. I knew what it was. The last time I wore the bracelet, the 6th month, was the same. A low-grade fever would flare up punctually every afternoon, seeping from the marrow of my bones, aching and sore. The doctors couldn't find the cause. My mother stood by with a calm expression. Now it was Yin Yin's turn. When the vitality siphoned away by the reverse oblique pull reaches its first critical point, the body activates its final compensatory mechanism, fever. It tries to use heat to kill non-existent pathogens, but in reality, it's burning through whatever reserves are left. Once the fever subsides, those reserves are depleted a little more. Each fever burns away another layer, until finally, when the reserves are completely exhausted, the person is gone. Yin Yin's reserves were much thinner than mine. In my previous life, it took nearly 2 years from the onset of low-grade fever to diagnosis, but for her, it had only taken 4 days. In those 4 days, her cheeks had hollowed out, her cheekbones protruded, her eye sockets were sunken, and her hair fell out in small clumps when touched, exactly like me in my previous life, only 10 times faster. On the evening of November 7th, my mother knocked on my door. She wasn't carrying bird's nest soup, and she wasn't smiling. After entering, she closed the door and leaned against it for a long time. Wan, Mom wants to ask you something. What is it? What exactly did you do to Yin Yin's beads that night? The room was very quiet. Outside the window, the ginkgo tree had almost shed all its leaves. Its bare branches swayed in the wind, casting shadows on the curtains like slender, bony hands. I sat on the edge of the bed, and my mother stood by the door. Only 3 or 4 steps separated us, but the air was stretched taut, like a rubber band pulled to its limit. I don't understand what you're talking about, Mr. Joe said. The beads had been tampered with. His voice trembled, not the trembling of crying, but the trembling of a dam about to give way. He said there was blood on them, not Yin Ying's blood. I lifted my left wrist and twisted the bracelet. Mom, I hold Yin Ying's hand every day. You said we sisters should be closer. Isn't it normal to touch the beads? No, the blood I touched. Her eyes turned red. The blood vessels in the whites of her eyes bulged one by one. It was smeared on. He said someone had deliberately smeared blood on the bracelet, every single bead. I didn't speak. He found nothing on my face because there was nothing on my face. I had waited for this day for so long that when it finally arrived, there was nothing left in my heart. No excitement, no fear, no anger. It was clean, like a mirror wiped excessively clean. Wan. Her voice suddenly softened. squeezing out from the cracks in the Damn, tell me, do you know something? Know what? I tilted my head. Mom, is there something I should know? Her lips parted and closed. When they parted, she wanted to say something. When they closed, she bit those words to pieces and swallowed them back. This repeated 3 or 4 times. Finally, she turned around, placed her hand on the doorknob, and said, "Go to bed early." The door opened and closed, and her footsteps trailed down the hallway to the east, heading in the direction of Ying's room. I waited until the footsteps faded before pulling the small porcelain bottle from under my pillow. The bottle was empty, the cotton swabs used up, leaving only a layer of dried, dark red residue on the inner wall. I clenched the bottle tightly in my palm. She asked, but she didn't dare to say it outright, because saying it outright would mean admitting she knew what the bracelet was for. She'd rather suspect me of tampering than admit she had been using the bracelet to drain my life from the very beginning. Shenruahua, your love is like this small porcelain bottle. It looks intact, but inside, it's long been empty. On November 9th, because I was hospitalized, I ended up at the same hospital as in my previous life, Beijing First People's Hospital. This time, however, it wasn't me who was admitted. I was placed in the VIP ward on the 6th floor of the inpatient department, where my mother had booked the entire floor. When I went to see him, he lay in bed with 2 tubes inserted, one for intravenous infusion and another connected to a monitor. He had become unrecognizably thin. His 17-year-old face looked like that of a 30-year-old. His hair was sparse, clinging thinly to his scalp, revealing the bluish-white skin beneath. When he woke up and saw me enter, his eyes turned toward me. In them remained only the last flicker of light, like a candle nearing its end. The flame shrunk to the size of a bean, trembling precariously in the wind. "Sister," her voice was so faint it was almost inaudible. I sat by the bed and held her right hand. The beads were still on her wrist, but they had loosened. The red cord, which once wrapped tightly 3 or 4 times around her wrist, could now be wound 5 or 6 times. The beads dangled loosely on her wrist, which was as thin as a withered branch. The temperature of the beads was much lower than mine, as if I were holding a stone taken straight from the refrigerator. "Sister," he called out again, his voice even softer, "I know what you did. I didn't move. Grandpa Zhou told me. He said there was your blood on the bracelet." He paused, taking a breath. Just saying those 2 sentences made his chest rise and fall as if he had just run 100 meters. "Why did you harm me?" I looked into his eyes. That tiny flame inside flickered violently, as if all the remaining oil had been poured onto it to burn brighter. It wasn't an accusation. It was confusion. He truly didn't understand. "Yinyin," I gathered her hand in mine, keeping my voice calm. "Do you know what those beads on your wrist are for?" Her eyelids trembled. "Do you know what this bracelet on your wrist is for?" He didn't answer, but his eyes spoke for him. That tiny flame shrank suddenly, down to the size of a pinprick. He knew, he had always known. "Was what you wrote in your diary true? Finding sister will cure my illness, bring sister back, and allow Yinyin to walk again. You knew this when you were 13. I rotated the beads halfway around her wrist. "You drank away 3 years of vitality drawn from my body. Now I've taken back only 4 days, and you ask me why I harmed you." Yinin's lips trembled, her entire body shaking. On the monitor, her heart rate jumped from 70 to 120, and the alarm emitted a short, sharp beep. "Do you know how I lived through those 3 years? I didn't let go of her hand, hair falling out, fever, wasting away to a skeleton, late-stage pancreatic cancer, pain so severe that painkillers were administered like water. In the last half-month, I lay in the hospital room on the floor below yours, with the caregiver stuffing a towel into my mouth for me to bite, afraid I might bite off my tongue from the pain. Meanwhile, you were upstairs eating lotus root starch, asking your mother when the bracelet could be removed." Her tears flowed from the corners of her eyes into her ears. "You knew it. You knew it all. You just thought your life was worth more than mine." I placed her hand back on the quilt and stood up. "Now, whose life do you think is worth more?" The alarm from the monitor summoned the nurse, and my mother rushed in behind her, with Mr. Zhou following at the end. The room was crowded with the sounds of abandonment, footsteps, and my mother calling his name. I retreated to the corner of the wall, watching Yinyin convulse on the hospital bed. The reverse learning had entered its final stage, and her body was being doubled by that string of beads. What the director took away wasn't just the 3 years she had siphoned from me, but also his own original foundation. 6 years doubled. Director Mr. Zhou stood at the foot of the bed, his hands hanging at his sides, not stepping forward to help. He looked at Yinyin, then turned to look at me. I leaned against the wall, meeting his gaze, the corners of my mouth slowly curling up. Sweetly, obediently, she averted her eyes. That night, I didn't return to the old house. My mother stayed at the hospital to accompany Ian. Mr. Zhou went somewhere unknown, and I sat alone in the small garden downstairs of the hospital. The bracelet on my left wrist glowed with a faint green light under the street lamp. The temperature was lower than yesterday because the beads on Ian's side were frantically extracting vitality, while the extraction on the bracelet's side had slowed down. The full power of the array was concentrated on the fortune side, while the main vitality had become a bystander. I slipped the bracelet off and held it in my palm. Moonlight passed through the jade, casting a small, flowing green spot of light on the ground. The 8 characters on the inner wall read, "Life for life, blood kin" as the guide. I stared at it for a long time, then slid the bracelet back onto my wrist. Not now, because it wasn't the limit yet. My mother hadn't broken down. Mr. Zhou hadn't admitted defeat. If I slipped the bracelet under her mattress now, it wouldn't hurt enough. I had to wait. Wait until Ian was drained to his last breath. Wait until Shen Ruohua knelt outside the doctor's office. Wait until Mr. Zhou had flipped through the Sumanshan clan life exchange records so many times it fell apart, yet still couldn't find a solution. Only then would I walk into the hospital room, take off the bracelet in front of all 3 of them, and tuck it under Ian's pillow. I'd let them watch as the bracelet and the beads touched the same person, activating the reverse attraction at maximum power, watching as the last bit of life in Ian was doubly demanded back. On the night of November 11th, Ian was issued a critical condition notice. When I rushed to the hospital, my mother was sitting on a bench outside the ICU. She wore a crumpled beige cardigan, her hair was loose, her makeup had long since smeared, and her eyeliner had blurred into 2 gray-black shadows. When she saw me approaching, she looked up. There was nothing left in her eyes, not emptiness, but ashes left after everything had burned away. Wan. Her voice was so hoarse it sounded as if it had been sanded down. The doctor said he might not make it through the night. I sat down beside her. The bench was cold, and the fluorescent lights in the corridor cast a stark, pale glow, draining the color from everyone's faces. The ICU door opened briefly as a nurse hurried in and out. The hum of machinery echoed from inside. "Mom," I turned to look at her. "There's something I've always wanted to ask you. When you found me and brought me back, was there even a second, just 1 second, when you thought about not putting that bracelet on me?" Her face cracked under the fluorescent light, not crying, but cracking, like a mirror struck right in the center, fractures spreading in all directions. Her lips cracked, her nostrils cracked, the skin at the corners of her eyes cracked. She opened her mouth, and a short, shattered sound escaped her throat, like a cat being choked. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. That one syllable was enough. I stood up and pushed open the ICU door. Ian lay amidst a tangle of machines, a tube in his mouth, electrodes on his chest, and 4 line in his arm. The numbers on the monitor jumped slowly, with long pauses between each beat. I walked to the bedside and looked down at him. His eyes were slightly open, and they shifted when he saw me. I raised my left wrist, gripped the bracelet with my right hand, and slid it off. It caught on the base of my palm, just as it had 3 years ago when my mother put it on me, scraping the skin painfully before it came free. The jade-green bracelet lay quietly in my palm, its warmth rapidly fading, from warm to cool, from cool to icy cold. I lifted Ian's pillow and slipped the bracelet underneath. The bracelet and the beads, the primary and secondary energies carved from the same piece of material, met just 20 centimeters beneath his body. Ian's body jerked violently. The monitor emitted a piercing alarm as his whole body began convulsing, his back arching off the bed, before falling back, then arching again. The string of beads on his wrist glowed, not a reflection of light, but a light of their own, a dark red like charcoal burning through. The bracelet under the pillow glowed too. The 2 lights connected, passing through his body to form a complete circuit. The ICU door burst open, doctors and nurses rushed in, my mother following behind. Then came Mr. Zhou. They saw Ian convulsing, saw the numbers on the monitor dropping, saw the dark red light seeping out from under the pillow. Mr. Zhou's face turned pale, not the pallor of fear, but the pallor of surrender. He recognized what that light was: reverse attraction, doubled repayment, draining the last of this side's vitality. The dark red handwriting he'd scribbled on the back of the reverse operation method for the life exchange array was now becoming reality inside Ian's body. My mother lunged toward the bed but was held back by a nurse. He gripped the bed rail, his face as white as plaster. shouting Inin's name over and over. Then he saw me. I saw my empty left wrist, my right hand hanging at my side, the expression on my face, clean, empty, nothing. It's you. His voice tore from his throat. It's me, I said. The ward fell silent for a moment. Even the monitor's alarm seemed muffled by something. Everyone was looking at us. My mother gripping the bed rail, me standing at the foot of the bed, Inin lying in the middle. Our positions were like a scale, with him on one end and me on the other. In the middle was the bracelet tucked under the mattress. When you put it on him, did you ask if I was willing? My voice was soft, as if coming from far away, but he heard it, every word. Her hands slipped from the bed rail, her whole body sliding down along the edge of the bed, knees hitting the floor with a dull thud. Mr. Joe bent to help her up, but she pushed him away. She knelt on the cold ICU floor, looking up at me, the cracks on her face finally shattering into pieces, falling away one by one. Wanwan's mom, please, please, please what? I looked down at her. Please save him, or please die in his place. She didn't answer, but she shifted half a step forward on her knees. That half step said everything. I crouched down to meet her eyes. Shenruahua's face was only 30 centimeters from mine, close enough for me to see my own reflection in her pupils, a woman in her 40s. Her well-maintained face streaked with tears and smeared makeup, lips trembling, nostrils flaring, like a mother truly at the end of her rope. Mom, I called her one last time. In my past life, when I was dying, you stood by my bed making a phone call. You said Inin's bracelet had changed color, that he must be better, and told me to try to stand up. I heard it, every word. Her pupils contracted sharply. So this time, you listen. I stood up and took a step back. When she takes her last breath, listen well. I turned and walked out of the ICU. Behind me were the monitor's alarms, the shouts of doctors and nurses, and the sound Shenruahua made on her knees. It wasn't crying, wasn't shouting, it was something torn raw from the deepest part of her chest, a sound like something breaking, like a string stretched for 20 years finally snapping. I didn't look back. The hallway was long, the fluorescent lights pale and stark. Step by step, I walked forward. My left wrist was empty, only a faint white mark left on the skin where the bracelet had pressed. Wind rushed in from the end of the hallway, chilling the mark. 20 years of cold. This bracelet has pressed on my wrist for 3 years, on my mother's wrist for 13 years, on my grandmother's wrist for over 30 years, and on the wrists of 5 generations of Shen family daughters for more than 100 years. Now it lies beneath Su Yin's pillow, carrying out its final task, not to prolong life, but to claim it. As I walked out of the inpatient building, I glanced up at the 6th floor ICU. The lights were still on, shadows flickered behind the curtains. Someone was being resuscitated, someone was kneeling, someone was breathing their last. In my previous life, that last breath was mine, but not this time. The ginkgo tree in the courtyard had shed all its leaves, its bare branches stretching toward the night sky like a collapsed hand. Standing beneath the tree, I extended my left hand. The pale mark on my wrist was almost invisible under the streetlight, but I knew where it was. It would slowly fade, from white to skin tone, from a mark to a memory. 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, one day, I would forget the feeling of ever wearing something on my wrist, but not today. Today, standing in the courtyard of Beijing First People's Hospital, I listened to the faint sounds drifting from the 6th floor windows, the wind, the hum of medical equipment, and the voice of a mother kneeling on the floor, calling her daughter's name. I withdrew my left hand, tucked it into my pocket, and turned toward the hospital gate. The security guard at the entrance glanced at me. As I walked out, a sudden thought struck me. The last time my mother placed the bracelet on my wrist, her fingers trembled. At the time, I thought it was excitement. Later, I thought it was struggle. Now, I suddenly understand. It was neither. She was counting, calculating how many years of life this pawn could buy for her other daughter. Shenruahua, have you counted it clearly now? What he owes me, what you owe me, what your entire family owes me, I will claim it all. With interest, I walked out of the hospital gate without hailing a taxi, moving forward along the road as streetlights receded one by one, stretching my shadow long and short in turn. The night wind blew from the north, carrying the chill that November should bring. I zipped my jacket up to the collar, raising it to shield my neck. Autumn in Beijing had ended, winter was coming. I have lived twice, died twice, once on a sickbed, and once rising from it. Now, for the first time, I am truly alive. After hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you liked this story, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.